A lot of beer.
All right. Well, Nathan, your expertise, here's where it comes into play here. So I think it's time we break down some of the rows here and chat a little bit about who we think can move up the quickest and all that good stuff. So let's start with row 11.
Yeah, so I'm really interested. We got to talk to him earlier. Really interested to see how Marcus Ericsson fares. He feels like I think he has a good race car, but it's really tough to start that far back. You've got so much dirty air you're dealing with. We start to see guys flirt with potentially getting lapped before you would think, even in a 2.5 mile racetrack. So it's up to guys like Marcus. You see Graham Rahal there on row 11, along with Catherine Legg. It's up to them to make up some positions really quickly. Give yourself a padding to those guys starting at the front, and just try to see if you can have some guys make some mistakes. It's really tough to pass this far back in the pack, and so a lot of times drivers say that the best way to pack is to have someone make a mistake. So you just kind of hope, if you're Marcus, if you're Graham, if you're Catherine, and some others on the screen here, that some folks in front of you will make a bobble, will predict someone's move incorrectly and have to either lay off the gas or hit the brakes, and you can weave around them. As Marcus said, he's hoping to be around 17th or so by a lap 100, which sounds both like a lot of positions to make up and maybe not so much. We'll have a couple pit stops in there, so we'll see. Connor Daly, similar way. His teammate Ryan Hunter-Ray is starting in the top 12. I think their driving styles are very different. I think Connor would have started much higher up if he had not had an engine snafu, I guess I would say, during qualifying on Saturday. So I think he's got a lot better. I think he's a lot better driver. I think he's got a lot better car than starting 29th, as we see right there. So those are my two guys to watch there in row 11 and row 10.
I can't imagine having a worse set of cars. 101 laps, they'll call it, but geez, getting that far ahead and that quickly, that sounds like a tough one. But all right, let's go to row 9 and row 8. Let's see these here.
Yeah, it's you mentioned the 101 lap thing. I think that's some of the folks that we've had on have talked a little bit about it, but really interested to see, once we get a better idea of the radar, how if teams are really plotting to running 200 laps or running to 101 and just kind of trying to be up front as much as possible. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But as you mentioned, we've got rows 7, 8, and 9 here in front of us. Row 7, I think, is what really stands out. I had it in my preview story, 33 things to know, that you can find on IndyStar.com. This row here, row 7, with Marco Andretti, Elio Castroneves, and Scott Dixon, when you add up the starts that they've had in their collective Indy 500 careers, second most in Indy 500 history. It's somewhere in the 62 range, so average of 20 for each of those drivers. You have 5 combined victories. Marco Andretti started on pole in 2020. This is a row of guys that, if you're looking at someone starting outside the top 15, I think these are 3 guys that we could see really move up and factor in. Elio, as you mentioned earlier in the show, had the second fastest lap time on Carb Day. Scott Dixon had the first fastest. So these guys feel really comfortable with their race cars. They've also been up at the front recently. Marco Andretti, on the other hand, started on pole in 2020, has been really frustrated with his race car these last several years. Ever since then, he didn't actually even lead an official lap in that race. He got passed on lap 1 and fell like a rock backwards. So I'm interested and hopeful in some ways that Marco can have a good race car this year, can factor in whenever you have an Andretti up front at this race, knowing the history of his grandfather Mario, his dad Michael, and other relatives in the Andretti family. This crowd is just different when you have an Andretti contending. We obviously haven't had an Andretti win this race since 1969. We'll see if Marco can do that today, but I bet you one of these 3 is up there in the top 5 or 6 once we get to the final 20 laps today.
Right. Oh, all right, here we go. Going up the rows. Let's take 6. Oh.
Yeah. 4, 5, and 6.
4,
I know
5,
it.
6. Oh my gosh. All right. What's standing out here for you, Nathan?
2 drivers, again, that we know didn't qualify maybe as well as they had hoped Alex Palou was on pole a year ago. Colton Herta has started in the middle of the front row before. Both of these guys, though, I think have very good race cars. Starting on row 5 in the 13th and 14th positions. We talked about Josef Newgarden earlier. He started 17th a year ago, was able to carve himself up to the front and ultimately win this race. Colton Herta starting in 13th, Alex Palou in 14th. I think those are perfect positions for those guys. Ultimately, if this race is short, maybe those guys aren't in the top 2 or 3 when we're getting down the stretch and it's cut off all of a sudden to factor in. If this race goes 200 laps, I think both of those guys, if they can stay out of trouble, if they can have clear pit stops, I think those two can be up at the front. I think they're the most likely to, even though you have some experienced guys in Takuma Sato, Ryan Hunter-Reay there in row 4, Kyle Kirkwood, Colton Herta's teammate at Andretti Global. I still think Colton and Alex, among the 9 that we have here on the screen, are the most likely guys to factor in once we get to the end of today's race this afternoon.
1, 2, and 3. Let's do it. There's my counting. Got it that time.
All right. We haven't talked about it a whole lot today, but as you see here, Team Penske locking out the front row. Scott McLaughlin, his first pole here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He hasn't started and he hasn't finished better than 14th in 3 previous starts here at the 500. Team Penske, of course, won last year in 2023. Before that, they hadn't won this race since 2019. We've had winners come off the front row nearly 50% of the time. I think 45 of the 107 runnings here. So Roger Penske has a really great shot when you think of where his drivers are, the experience that they have, and Josef and Will being former winners here recently. Scott feels a little like a driver of fate in some ways. He's had a fast car in practice. He beats his teammates in qualifying on Sunday in the Fast 6. He has a really interesting storyline, and having that 2019 Team Penske 500 winner Simon Pagenaud on his pit stand. He's been working with Simon kind of behind the scenes ever since February to work Simon back into IndyCar. As you guys may know who are watching this, Simon was running full-time last year, had a nasty crash at Mid-Ohio with Meyer Shank Racing, and has not been back at an IndyCar track or at an IndyCar race since. So this was a great way to work Simon back into the fold, something that Simon was eager to do when Scott asked him to help him out. Scott essentially just wanted some advice. He, as I mentioned earlier, has had some really tough introduction to the 500 in his first 3 years here. He asked a former teammate of his, someone who's really methodical, takes copious amounts of notes. I think he'd run a dozen 500s here. Simon had essentially just said, I need some help. And it wasn't as much on track as much as off track. The mental preparation, the planning, thinking about what you want to accomplish every single day on track during practice, and kind of just the flow of the month. Scott is one of those drivers that feels a little like a driver of destiny, and as Greg was talking to us about earlier, it's hard not to pick with your heart. I've made obviously picks for every single 500 I've been here. I haven't been remotely close of landing any of my picks from 2020 to 2023. So we'll go into those later on here to talk about who we think's going to win this race. My driver I picked was up on that screen. I think Scott is would be a fun winner here. He'd be a first timer. I think he would celebrate incredibly well. His team is called the Thirsty Threes, both because of how thirsty they are for victories, but also how well they party off track.
Seriously?
Yeah. He's got Did
he say his drink of choice?
I don't know what it is. He would be. I'm sure he'd be drinking champagne tonight to celebrate. He's got a really cool T-shirt that the folks at the shop put together with Scott and his team. It's out. They have a truck out in the fan zone area. It's actually a big 3 with the cork of a champagne bottle popping off. Oh my gosh! So really, really cool.
I love it.
Yeah. So we'll see if that Team Penske trio can pull it off. It would be an immense storyline. It would be Roger Penske's 20th 500 victory here. He has 19 so far. But I think there's also a great chance that someone outside of Team Penske, folks that we had on the screen there earlier, Alexander Rossi, potentially. I don't know if Kyle Larson has what it takes to know how to battle with these cars over the final 10 to 15 laps to win this race. Oftentimes drivers talk about needing a couple races to just kind of figure out how to chart that out, but I definitely think we could have one of those 9 there that we just had on the screen win this race.
Yeah, he mentioned, I believe he ended up 13th in practice. He mentioned it was a little bit of an adjustment for him, but you did also mention prediction. So I want plan A, plan B. So say the race only gets cut in half.
Okay. Who
are you picking? And if you get the full 200 laps, who's your top dude?
All right.
Or dudette?
Sure. So I know my initial pick when we ran our picks in IndyStar.com, we have our special section in the print paper this morning. If you got a chance to grab one of those, I encourage you to do so. So my first, second, and third, first place, Josef Newgarden, be a repeat winner, our first repeat winner in more than 2 decades. Fun note, he would get a $440,000 bonus from Borg Warner that they have been building. It's essentially a pool that's been building $20,000 every single year. They've been doing it since 1995. Elio Castroneves got a smaller amount than that when he went back-to-back in 2001 and 2002, but it's been building ever since then. Started at $20,000, I think, in 2003, and they've been adding $20,000 since, so we're now 22 years in, and we'll see if Josef can get that. My second place driver, Colton Herta, as I mentioned earlier, I think he's got a great race car. He's not starting too far back, and I think he's got what it takes to factor into this race. He really hasn't in his career that started in 2019. He's had a couple years where he started up at the front in the top 5, but hasn't really been one of those drivers that we've been watching down the stretch, and I think after some years of experience, maybe a little bit of a refocus this offseason and how he approaches his career and his craft in general, I think Colton could factor into things. And then Scott McLaughlin, as I mentioned, great story. Certainly think he could win this race. Ultimately, we see so rarely that the fastest car wins this race. I can't tell you how it's going to happen. It still may happen for Scott, but more likely than not, it seems like nowadays, the guy with the fastest car doesn't win this race, whether it's a pit stop, whether it's a yellow that comes at the wrong time, whether it's just getting past at the end. You get in the wrong place. We saw it with Marcus Ericsson last year. He was leading on the last lap, which ironically is not where you want to be with these cars, where second place can pass first place so easily, and it's all about timing and a little bit of luck. So ultimately, I feel like Scott can factor in, but when I was making my picks earlier this week, he was not the guy I went with. So how about you? This is your first 500. You were at Carb Day on Friday, kind of looking at how things have gone in practice and qualifying. Who are your picks for winning this race here today?
I'm not gonna lie, you picked my guy, Josef Newgarden. I like him. He's so nice. I think it'd be really cool to see him do it back to back, like you mentioned. To be honest, he was like just the guy that I want to win. I didn't have like a plan B. Say they do in this race early. Who are you picking?
I'm going to take a different driver out of that Team Penske contingent. Will Power. Will has won this race in 2018. He's been close a handful of times before that. Hasn't been very much of a factor, but he's really on his game this year. I think this will be his fourth race of this year, starting second. He's been so close on so many poles. He has been so close on a handful of wins. He's been on the podium a handful of times already this year. And I just think he's at the top of his game. He won a championship in 2022. This Team Penske team is so great on strategy. With having 3 guys at the top, I think they have a little bit of freedom. If things get a little iffy with weather coming sooner than 200 laps, I would be surprised if they didn't kind of put some guys on some different strategies. And I think Will is a great, calm, collected guy that in a weird situation could figure out a way to both have luck fall his way and put his car at the right position at the right time. He's working with some great people on his timing stand. His engineer, Dave Faustino, has been with him throughout basically his whole career. Excited to see what Will can do today, and I feel like if things get shaken up a little bit, I think he's a guy that can factor in that way.
I know. But experience does matter too, though.
Absolutely.
Experience absolutely matters. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know if I got a sweat droplet, someone spit on me, but I feel like I may have felt a little something
The wind definitely feels like it's picked up here over
Yeah.
the last half an hour. Again, we're sitting under an umbrella. It still looks just a little hazy as the fans have been filing in. Certainly feels a lot more full than we started at 8:30 an hour and a half ago. But I know Doug, when we spoke to him at 6:20 this morning, he said the rain was likely to come somewhere from noon to 1, but he also warned that there could be some rain showers that came before the heavy stuff, before the thunder, the gusts of wind that could reach maybe 50, 60 miles an hour, before the lightning, of course. And so we'll see over this next half an hour or so if we start to get some rain droplets. We could. I think we are going to get, if we haven't already, an update soon from the folks in the media center. Doug Bowles would likely be the one giving that update. He said this morning 9:30, 10 o'clock would likely be that time frame. He said with us earlier that 9:30, 9:45 would likely be where they would make those final decisions and then get them to us here fairly quickly. So I think we will have an answer here very soon. It seems like, as I've been talking, even this wind is picking up.
I know.
So unfortunately, things might be starting to get a little iffy. Hope we haven't been able to watch a radar, but hope you guys out there who are watching have been following along, have a good sense of where the weather is, what it's going to be doing. Make good choices. I know it's a great place to be. I know you love sitting in the stands, just enjoying what you're eating, enjoying what you're drinking, enjoying being with the people that you're with. Absolutely. But at the same time, hope everyone stays really safe. Plan ahead. When we get this race going here, eventually they'll have plenty of heads up. You will be able to get back in your seats. Even if you're still at home right now, you'll be able to get here, get parked, get to your seats before we get rolling here this afternoon.
Yeah, and I know we didn't get much time with Gavin to chat about it, but Kyle Larson, if he does end up staying,